Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to another Mortal Kombat lore-oriented video. With us having covered some of the missing characters on the channel recently, it kind of sparked the question in my mind of where exactly are the missing characters of each of these trilogies? What could they be up to now? And what could become of them in Liu Kang's new era and vision? Because with all of the character changes and alterations, it's naturally caused a bit of a ripple effect throughout the franchise, as many characters are narratively tied to each other, and with many of those characters having been changed from who they were, or actively altered by Liu Kang's wishes, how does these changes affect those characters in the present? Well, that is what we will be talking about in today's video. Now, this will probably wind up being a small little mini-series on the channel, and we will be working backwards throughout the franchise to analyze these characters and know what's become of them. Of course, first, starting off with the Reboot Trilogy, as it has been the most recent, then tracking back to the 3D Trilogy, and then of course, the original lineup. So today, we will be solely focusing on the characters introduced from Mortal Kombat X to 11, as we did have a plethora of very new and very different faces to the fandom, ones who were very dependent on their predecessors, as many were labelled and seen as the next generation. But before we do begin, as always, if you like what we do here and wish to see more, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does go a very long way with not just supporting the video, but this channel out as a whole. Also, recently it's come to my attention that some of you may want to check your subscription settings, as I've read from the comments down below that quite recently, a lot of you haven't been getting notified or actually see my videos in your sub boxes. So please do give that a look and ring that bell if you want to stay up to date with the latest stuff here. Anywho, let's jump right into things. Now, to really kind of break this down and sort the characters from each other, let's talk about the ones that we do know currently exist in the present. First, starting off with everyone's favourite paradox, and only real returning remnant of that old timeline, Geras. The celestial architect of time was really the only one that could be beside Liu Kang, as he forged a new world and era for the present. But outside of this though, Geras would play a rather minor role in that of the story, monitoring the hourglass as Liu Kang abandoned his titanhood. So he would become its one and only protector for a very long time, until Titan Shang Tsung started to interfere with Liu Kang's vision. This would set the two Primarchs against each other, with Liu Kang narrowly defeating his longtime adversary. In the aftermath of these events, Liu Kang would permanently relinquish his role as Titan, and then pass ownership and care of the hourglass over to Geras, giving him full control and protection of it, as he knew that it would be forever safe in the hands of the Warden of Time. Our next character, and final addition from that of the Combat Pack, would be Takeda Takahashi, son of Kenshi and Cetrion. Now, of all of the characters introduced in the Combat Kids, Takeda was arguably the most beloved amongst fans, as he was the son of Kenshi, tutored by the fabled Hanzo Hasashi. Skilled in both telepathy and the ways of the Shirai Ryu, he was kind of an amalgamation of two fan-beloved characters into one individual. Yet, even with that in mind, he did not return in Mortal Kombat X, only making his comeback in that of the new era as part of its first wave of DLC. So what do we know of him in the present here? Well, honest to God, very little, as he's not at all been mentioned in any intros or bits of dialogue, nor do we know of his current status in the universe, as it has been foreshadowed that Kenshi and Cetrion are separated, at least for now. In fact, the only time we ever see him is during a bit of a throwaway cutscene during the climax of the game, where the timelines are converging and clashing, and he and his team is slain by Titan Kitana. Thus, we definitely know we aren't getting this iteration of the character. Now, when it comes to DLC in general, it's kinda hard to know just how canonical they are to this timeline, as Guest and Triborg are a perfect example of this. if he is indeed canonical and does exist in this timeline, there are gonna have to be a few changes and alterations for the new era. Because currently, Hanzo Hasashi is a very young man, one who is under the tutelage of Kuai Liang and Tomas Verbada. So what could be done with Takeda here? Well, it is very possible that Takeda could actually wind up being a character conceived before Kenshi's separation to Tsuchin, then later brought in by his father into that of the Shirai Ryu, being taught in their ways, and training alongside Hanzo Hasashi. So conceptually, this changes up a lot of the dynamic they once had, but for the current settings of the universe, it does make a lot of sense. Because with Kenshi's ties to that of the Yakuza, it's completely understandable that he would take his son and distance him as far away as possible from his background. So I definitely do think that this is probably the most safe way to introduce the character, considering how widely altered this new era is. Another DLC I do want to touch on is actually Ferra and in turn Torr. Having made their debut in Mortal Kombat X, they would be one of many bodyguards that looked after the new Khan of the realm, Kotal, acting as one of his many generals during his civil war with Mileena. In the present though, things do look to be very different for them, and I don't think that's in a good way. Whilst much like Takeda, in the sense that they aren't all mentioned in any intros, one of the many mysteries that have surrounded this pair is whether or not they are a naturally formed race of Outworld, or something actually forged in Shang Tsung's flesh pits. Because with the game's very heavy focus on Outworld, we're exposed and name dropped to a number of different characters and faces, the Shokuns and Centaurs to name a few, but never at any point do we ever see a symbiotic pairing. And with Shang initially stripped of his magical prowess, he of course in turn would have never come to have forged the flesh pits. Which, yes, means that now it's very possible that the two don't exist in the present. Maybe in time as Shang accumulates his own power, but right now it isn't looking too great for the duo. Now moving on to characters mentioned in passing or name drops, we do have Kotal here. And as expected, very little is known of him in the present, only mentioned as one of the many combatants who were defeated by Raiden's hand during the tournament. So what we can get an idea of is that the Oztec do exist in the present, with Kotal probably being heralded as their chosen champion since he was picked to represent them in combat. Sadly, very little is known about him outside of this, but it is worth pointing out that of course, with Shao's exile, it's very possible that he may join his side, or instead remain loyal to the royal court, as Kitana herself is now general of Outworld's army. So that's all that we currently know of Kotal here. Another character that would be name dropped here is actually Kung Jin, and this is definitely a character that I will say is probably the most interesting out of the bunch here, as whilst not present on the roster, he would actually appear during Armageddon, perishing much like Takeda and the rest of his team. But what gripped my attention was the fact that he actually features in concept art from the game Shrine, possibly meaning that maybe at some point in time, Kung Jin may have actually been considered for the game's roster. Of course, we'll never truly know, but it is still a pretty interesting factoid that I wanted to throw out regardless. In terms of story and narrative significance though, we only ever do hear of Kung Jin in passing, as it looks like even in the new era, Kung Jin has fallen back into his ways of a hired thief. This is only mentioned through intros, mind you, but it does paint a very interesting future for the character, as Kung Jin only ever joined the Special Forces following Lao's death, as he was interested in finding ways of purging his cousin of his revenant corruption. And with that death of course not happening here, we could get a very new and very different take on this character moving forward. Now there are two somewhat races mentioned in passing here. It doesn't necessarily allude to the characters that have represented them, but it does at the very least mean that they could exist here, and that is the Khitan and the Nakanadans. The Khitans look to be in a very interesting position in this universe. because in the fall of Shao, it is mentioned in an intro that he would now seek a new army to forge in his vision, with the chitin being one of the many enslaved under his thumb. It doesn't necessarily mean that D'Vorah will return, but if there was ever a representative to come back for them, she's probably the strongest contender. Plus, in this universe, much like the previous one, the chitin are still held up in pretty high disdain by the rest of Outworld's races, so they already do kind of play that villain role. Moving on to the Naknadans now, they're kind of in a similar position, where they are also mentioned in passing, yet unlike the chitin, do feature in the game's story, as they are one of the many races pointed out by Princess Melina, as she does escort the Earthrealmers to Outworld's Grand Hall. Now, with all of the changes and alterations, things look to be very different for the Naknadans, as well as Collector. Originally, they were known as debt collectors for Shao Kahn, but now, with Shao's empire having never existed, it kind of puts them in a very open position in the universe. So what could go on with them? Well, the nature of the Naknadans is one of wealth and money. They follow it wherever it is, hence how it made them the perfect debt collectors. They're kind of obsessed with it. Thus, I think that whoever is willing to pay them the most money here is probably what will earn their loyalty in the new era. Now, moving along to missing characters, we do actually have a few here, and some that I honestly see being changed for that of the future. So starting off, let's touch on Cassie Cage. Designed to be the somewhat successor to Johnny and Sonya, she was an interesting hybridized blend of Cage's ancestral energy, whilst retaining Sonya's militarized background. She had a unique, interesting splice of ideas, ones that, though whilst good on paper, didn't quite translate over as well as Takeda's. In the new era though, this is completely different, as she doesn't currently exist, with Sonya yet to be canonically introduced in the new era, as well as Johnny himself having ever so recently been divorced to his former wife. Cassie just simply doesn't exist in the present. Never mentioned in passing, and only ever seen during Armageddon, where yes, she is killed off. So the only way this character could maybe possibly return is if she was conceived during Johnny's marriage, which, let's face it, is pretty common amongst actors, or this happened before the marriage. If they were to play it safe though, I see this all happening following the divorce. Yet, even with that in mind, we probably won't see this character for a very, very long time, because a time skip would be needed for her to become playable. And the very same could be said for her best friend, Jacqui Briggs, who is in a very similar situation with Cassie, as Jacqui's very existence only kind of came to be following Jax losing his arms, as it was during his recovery process where he would be introduced to Ferra. In the new present though, Jax is yet to actually be introduced, only featuring in Kenshi's endings, where we do see he still retains his arms. Thus, the accident that brings them together is yet to happen in this timeline. Moving along, we do have everyone's favourite gunslinger, and that's the cowboy, Erron Black. And this is a very, very interesting situation for the modern era, as so much of his character is actually tied to that of Shang Tsung. You see, Erron is a relic of a bygone era, born hundreds of years before his initial appearance. He is a remnant of the Wild West, and the only reason he's been able to exist as long as he has been due to Shang Tsung, as it was the sorcerer that granted him his nigh immortality. In the new era though, with the sorcerer born stripped of his magical capabilities, it actually in turn could very well mean that Erron Black just might be gone now. Unless this character is written in as an Outworlder or an Edenian, I really don't think there's a way for his character to appear here, as he is unbelievably reliant on Shang Tsung's magic here. Now, our last and somewhat final character is one that I do believe has been erased from the timeline, Cetrion, the former Gaia and Mother Earth of the human plane, as the death of Kronika kind of meant the somewhat eternal demise of both Shinnok as well as Cetrion, as it's even somewhat alluded to during the game's campaign. As once Shinnok's amulet is revealed, Geras says that Shinnok has effectively been neutralized. So it's not really hard to believe that maybe Cetrion may have suffered a similar fate. Whilst yes, we do know that the Elder Gods exist in the present, they are only mentioned in name only. So with the death of Kronika, it does look like her kin may have followed suit. And I mean, I don't really need to touch on Kronika here, as it is pretty much used as a bait and switch. But we do learn that from Geras, that upon a Titan's fall, it is deemed as a true death, not something they can physically come back from. So with that said everyone, this has covered every single Reboot character and current possible whereabouts in the new era. I hope this has also painted the many possible futures that do surround these characters moving forward, because the reboot of this new era really does impact many of the characters in a multitude of ways, as even the smallest, tiniest changes from what you have seen can have such ginormous ripple effects to that of the other characters. Now I have a big question for all of you, and that is, what do you think has become of some of these characters' fates? And what can you see becoming of them in the new era? Please do comment down below, as I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and ideas. But until the next one everyone, that's been it for me. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.